We are in our second to last chapter, believe it or not. And this chapter has to do with national security policymaking. And regardless whether you're a Republican, you're an independent, you're a Democrat, we as Americans want to feel safe and secure. And in this chapter, we're going to learn about some governmental entities that hopefully make us safe and secure. And if you missed class, I hope this PowerPoint gives you a schematic of what we did in class so you are in the loop. And the very first term is foreign policy, very general word. And by now you know what a policy is. And essentially, policies involve choices, right? We have to choose what we give emphasis to, what we disregard, how much we give to one area, how little we give to another. So it's like domestic policy in that respect, but these are the decisions in terms of the world. Who do we talk to? Who do we invest our time and our money with? Who is an enemy? Who is a friend? Who's a frenemy? Now, in foreign policy, the president is the chief initiator of this. Okay, so with every president, we see some changes. Okay, so that's foreign policy. Now, the United Nations, I know you have learned about this before, but a reminder. Now, this organization was created in 1945 after World War II, and members agree to renounce war and to respect certain human and economic freedoms. Now, the seat of real power in the United Nations is the Security Council. Those are where those big, heavy decisions are made in that Security Council. So a little bit of a repeat term there. Now, the third term is also a repeat, NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Again, post World War II, created in 1949, and it's an organization whose members include the US, Canada, most of Western Europe, and Turkey. Now, they agreed to combine military forces and to treat a war against one as a war against all. And the NATO countries have increased since 1949, and it's a big, important organization in geopolitics today. Now, the European Union, this is a group of European countries, a transnational government composed of European nations that coordinates monetary issues, trade issues, immigration, labor policies. On a practical level, if you travel to Europe, you can go from EU country to EU country. It's the same currency, the euro, and the European Union came out in the early 90s and it has grown since then. Now, the Secretary of State, now we're going back to America, is the head of the Department of State and traditionally a very key advisor to the president on foreign policy. They have the president's ear on how we should deal with other countries. Now, based on the U.S. Constitution in presidential succession, and you know on your AP exam, we need to focus on succession. It's the fifth most powerful position in government. Most people can get to three: president, vice president, speaker of the House, president pro tem, and then the secretary of state. So this is a heavy hitter in the world of American government. The Secretary of Defense. Now, the head of the Department of Defense is the president's advisor on military policy. Now, that's a key decision in foreign policy, whether we go to war or whether we contribute weapons and that sort of thing. These are kind of make or break decisions. So the Secretary of Defense is a very important position in government as well. Now, the Joint Chief of Staff, these are the commanding officers of the armed forces who advise the president on military policy. Very bureaucratic organization. And in a sense, when you're dealing with such high stake decisions like war, it's best to have experts and several voices that can talk to the president. Hopefully, that president makes a rational decision based upon the opinions of others. Probably the most famous one you learned in history was Truman and the decision to drop the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, before he made that decision, he talked to his people, including the Joint Chief of Staff, and it's an important role, obviously. Now, the CIA, or the Central Intelligence Agency, is an agency created after World War II. Again, are you seeing the pattern here post World War II? We don't want to have that happen again. We're looking for more security. So the CIA coordinates American intelligence activities abroad. Now, it became involved in intrigue, conspiracy, and meddling. Now, the CIA, for some people, is not a positive organization, and a lot of conspiracy theories, revolve around the CIA. But they are, in theory, keeping the world safe out there and making decisions on intelligence and that sort of thing. Now, isolationism is a philosophy. Now, it's a foreign policy that was followed throughout most of America's history, in particular the Monroe Doctrine. In 1823, President Monroe said, hey, world, we'll leave you alone if you leave us alone. And that allowed America to grow from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean and all those things that happened, the Civil War and Manifest Destiny and that kind of thing. So, isolationism is a philosophy saying, stay out of other people's affairs. And there's a time and a place for it. However, people have disagreed about that time or place throughout history. Now, containment doctrine really was in vogue in the Cold War, and it was a foreign policy advocated by George Kennan that called for the U.S. to isolate the Soviet Union and contain its advances. In other words, we can't stop communism, but we can contain it. We can't stop it, we can contain it. In short, if you cross this line, we have a problem. Now, those problems, if you remember from your history class, the Korean War and the Vietnam War were fought to contain communism. So, America, this wasn't just idle philosophy, there was some teeth in these policies. Now, the Cold War, this was a time of foreign policy that was very, very difficult. It happened post World War II and it ended in the early 90s. I happened to go through high school at the end of the Cold War. I graduated in 1992, so I got to see it firsthand. So during the Cold War, foreign policy decisions could mean the end. If you recall the Cuban Missile Crisis and mutual assured destruction, these were high-stake foreign policy decisions. Now, I'm not saying the world of 2024 has any less nukes or whatever, but that tension has lessened from those 45, 50 years of the Cold War. Now, during the Cold War, the arms race, very tense in the 50s, where the U.S. would make weapons and then the Soviets would make weapons and it would just go, they'd make two, we'd make three, they'd make four. And it went on and on and on. So bear in mind, the foreign policy decisions corresponded with these arms races, or this arms race, excuse me, which was an incredibly tough time. Now, these are missiles and those are guns. Impressive, aren't they? Of course they are. Anyway, moving on. Now, a détente. Now, a détente is this it's a lessening of tensions. And what happened in particular during the Cold War, there's this idea of brinkmanship. I'm going to appear tough. I'm going to appear strong. I'm not, I'm going to take it right to the edge and then it would smooth out. Then it would rise up again to the point we're about to go and then it would smooth out. So a détente is a lessening of tensions. To scale to something you might understand, if you've been in a conflict with somebody, then all of a sudden you say, you know what, I'm cool with them now. It's not that tense. And then maybe a week later, something happened. They said something, then it flares up again. That's that whole kind of seesaw between brinkmanship and détente. Now, Strategic Defense Initiative came out when I was a kid, and it was President Reagan. And I remember these kind of very cartoony graphics they showed me as a child to put our mind at ease. And it was a defense system to take out enemy missiles before they hit us. It was nicknamed Star Wars Defense. Now, the question was, did we have the actual capabilities to do that, or was it just trying to put the American public at ease? That kind of thing. Okay, that was Strategic Defense Initiative. Now, interdependency. In the world of foreign policy, we live in a world where we need each other for commodities, and we have a lot of these organizations like NATO, and we're not islands unto ourselves. So this mutual dependency in which the actions of one nation affects everyone makes foreign policy all the more important. And what gets difficult in real life, let's say it's an ally that does something that's objectionable to us. What do we do? Do we let it happen? Do we get involved? Do we break the relationship? It's incredibly complex. In fact, this graphic here shows the actual interdependency of the world right now. And as you can see, it is a tangled web. And those who deal with foreign policy have to be very cognizant and very delicate in not disrupting this web, if you get that. Now, a tariff, this is a term you've already learned about. It's a special tax added to imported goods. And now, a part of foreign policy is if I'm going to do business with you, am I going to put a tariff on? Now, if you put a tariff on yours, do I have to put a tariff on mine? And tariffs, in theory, are supposed to balance out trade imbalances. However, in In modern times, there's some nations America has that has very disparate balances, and we're on the bad end of the stick with some of them. Okay, so tariffs is an attempt to lessen that imbalance and keep it more balanced. Now, there's the word balance, balance of trade. Now, this is the ratio of what is paid for imports to what is earned from exports. When more is imported than exported, sorry, typo there is a balance of trade deficit. Now, a good relationship is even, but in the world of economics, doesn't always work that way. But we attempt to keep that balance. Now, OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. We live in an industrialized world. Oil is king. And this OPEC organization was primarily Arab nations, or is primarily Arab nations, that controls the price of oil. Now, bear in mind, if OPEC lessens the price of oil, that's going to be economically favorable. If they raise the price of oil, it can be really problematic. And it does fluctuate, okay? So those who control the oil can really have a pretty strong grip on the world economy. So that's the end of that PowerPoint. So if you go back to Google Classroom, you will see an assignment that will take you through these, but that's the overview. So again, if you were absent, hopefully this gave you the basics of what you need to do. And I want you to go a little bit deeper on that assignment on Google Classroom. So I appreciate you watching.